So if you're a Journey fan, especially if you're a fan of the stuff pre-Escape, when Greg Rolie was still in the band, I think you're going to enjoy this little article. Now, what really makes this article unique and why I wanted to share it with you today is not just because it's basically almost a concert review of Journey on tour on the Departure album, but he makes this really interesting reference about Greg Rolie. Because even as an observer, as he's watching the band, he makes a comment in here realizing that Steve Perry and Neil Schon are kind of becoming the focal point of the band as songwriters, as performers, and Greg Rolie seems to almost be being kind of pushed to the side a little bit. This guy can actually sense it, and he brings it up in this article. And why that's important is because technically, it gets complicated, but really, that's the last studio album that most people are familiar with that Greg Rolie was on. He was gone when Escape came out. And that's when they brought in Jonathan Cain, and the band kind of really, really changed at that point. When I say technically, Departure came out, and that was their biggest selling album at the time. That's the one that had Any Way You Want It. That's the tour that they're on here. But after that, they had a soundtrack that they did that was called Dream After Dream. It was for some Japanese fantasy film. And it's actually a really cool record, but you'll never hear the band play any of that stuff in concert. Not that I know of. I can't even imagine it. It's just different. It doesn't sound anything like you've heard from Journey before. It's really great stuff, a lot of it though. It really is. But you buy it, and at first you're like, what is this? And yet it's really good, but it's not, and Greg Rolie's on it, and it came out after Departure, but it's not really one a lot of people think of. And then they had another album called Captured that was really Greg Rolie's last album, and then Escape. And it's actually, when you look at the names of these albums, you have Departure, which is the one they're talking about here, and they always had that little kind of scarab spaceship thing. So they had Departure, and then they had Captured, which was the live album, and then the next one after that was Escape. So they had this little pattern that they were following. So anyway, Departure, very, very important album, had some huge songs on it. I actually loved the album Departure. I thought it was spectacular. That stuff, that early stuff with Journey, Infinity, I mean, it was so good. All the stuff when Steve Perry joined the band. I know it was very poppy, much more than it was prior to him, but it was great music. It just was. Okay, so this is from the Berkeley Gazette, April 6, 1980. And just to level set, the album came out in February of 1980. This was a leap year album, February 29th, if I'm not mistaken. And so this would have actually just like a little over a month, like 5-6 weeks after the album came out. So that's what this is when this is written. Journey has arrived at last. Journey's appearance last week at the Oakland Coliseum was clearly one of the year's highlights for the Bay Area's legions of concertgoers. From the first notes, the sold-out crowd of 15,000 screamed and whistled as Journey presented the material from their newest album, Departure, for the first time. Friday night's performance was the first in a long string of dates that will take them all over America. It wasn't so long ago, 3 years in fact, that Journey was just another struggling band from San Francisco trying desperately to carve out a little chunk of the rock and roll pie for itself. Formed by Santana alumni Neil Schon and Greg Rolie in 1975, the band recorded 3 albums without ever capturing the public's imagination. They had built a reputation that saw them typecast as the baseball slugger who couldn't hit the long ball in the clutch. And it's interesting for those of us that when we discovered Journey, because again, I didn't know anything. I was very young, and first time I ever knew anything about him was when Escape came out. That was actually the first concert I went to, was the Escape. I think I did a video about that recently, was the Escape tour. So this is the first time I knew about them, and then you hear that and you start going backwards and you start buying the like Departure, and you go, oh, whoa, Any Way You Want It, I love that song, and then Wheel in the Sky, and you start, you go back to Infinity, and you start discovering all these old things, but then there were the other 3 albums that were before all this, and they were the non-Steve Perry albums. And they just didn't, anyway, it was just like a different band. But as it said there, Journey was a spin-off band from Santana. So Greg Rolie had played keyboards and sang in Santana, and Neil Schon had started in Santana as a teenager, and the two of them then left Santana, started their own little group called Journey, put out those 3 albums, didn't go anywhere. Then their manager, you'll hear the story told a few different ways, but basically their manager brought Steve Perry in, or a tape of him in, and basically said, here's your new lead singer. And they weren't necessarily really excited about it. Greg Rolie, I don't know that he loved it because he was the singer. And then they bring Steve Perry in there, and he's just so good. You know, I love Greg Rolie's voice, don't get me wrong, but I mean, come on, Steve Perry, right? I mean, you just understand he's just the guy. So anyway, that's what they're talking about here. They had those 3 albums, and then they just weren't going anywhere. Okay, then when in 1978 they latched on to lead vocalist Steve Perry, their fortunes quickly changed, and now after the success of Infinity and Evolution, Journey appears on the verge of becoming one of the largest, drawing heavy rock bands in the world with Departure. With a loud assault led by Neil Schon's frantic guitar playing and Steve's soaring vocals, the band roared through the majority of Departure. During the concert's first hour, Homemade Love, People and Places, Walks Like a Lady. Oh my gosh, People and Places is such a great song. Walks Like a Lady is such a great. I mean, this music was so good. And especially Precious Time. We're alive with energy. And the band threw in only an occasional song from Departure's predecessors, such as Too Late and Just the Same Way. Just the same way she loves you. Man, that was cool stuff. I love that music. To break up the onslaught of unfamiliar material. Towards the end of the first hour, Journey launched into their most popular material, Lovin' Touchin' Squeezin', another great song, the single off Evolution that's brought the band to national prominence last year as bassist Ross Valerie and drummer Steve Smith laid down a solid beat for Steve's soulful vocals. Journey's not soulful very often, but it was the universal appeal of the song's rhythm and vocals that helped it become so easily accepted on AM radio stations. Man, it was such a great tune. Feeling That Way, Anytime, and Wheel in the Sky closed out the show. And you like I said, everybody knows those songs. Feeling That Way and Anytime. I think those 2 songs, every time you hear them on the radio, they play them back to back, no matter what. Wheel in the Sky, great song. Wheel in the Sky, so great. Close out the show with the band's most requested tunes from Infinity and Any Way You Want It, the single from the new album. Now this is the part I was talking about earlier that I thought was really interesting about this reviewer. If Departure points to any new trends, it's the increasing dominance of Neil and Steve when it comes to composing the songs. Whereas keyboardist Rolie had a hand in writing nearly all the material on the first 3 LPs and took part in quite a few on Infinity and Evolution, on Departure, he only contributes to Someday Soon and I'm Crying. The Neil Schon Steve Perry songwriting team appears in complete control. Even though Journey falls into many of the cliche traps all heavy metal bands suffer from, that's funny too, that back in those days, these bands were being referred to as heavy metal, which is the furthest thing I would ever call Journey. But anyway, people were using it so broadly back then. Let's see here. Suffer from, they're still writing some of the best rock around these days, from Wheel in the Sky to Just the Same Way to Lovin' Touchin' Squeezin' to Any Way You Want It. The band is surely picking the best songs from each album to capitalize on. It's been quite a few years since a hard rock band has been able to find the right ingredient to infiltrate the AM radio waves. I'm glad to see it's Journey. And then the interesting kind of next step to all this stuff is once Greg Rolie left, and as he was noting here, it was the Steve Perry, Neil Schon team that was writing the music. Greg Rolie leaves, and then when you get into Escape, you can actually feel even that changing a little bit. And it started moving to the Steve Perry, Jonathan Cain songwriting duo. And what really, really put that on the map, of course, was the song Open Arms, which was the last song on the album Escape. And I think I've told the story before on this channel, and you probably know it if you're listening to this, but I'll just repeat it. Jonathan Cain, so Greg Rolie leaves the band, Jonathan Cain joins for the album Escape. And while they're working on that album, he's playing a little thing on the piano, and Steve Perry hears it and he goes, "What's that?" And Jonathan Cain, who had been in the Babies before, said, "It was a song I wanted to do with the Babies, but John Waite didn't like it and had some kind of really negative things to say about it." And then Steve Perry goes, "Well, that's their loss. We want to use it." And that ended up being the song Open Arms. And then there was some controversy over it. And this gets back to that whole thing because Neil Schon didn't really want to put it on the album because it was so slow. This was like slow song. And so they tucked it way the last song on side 2. And then it ended up being their biggest song. And then a lot of people can say that that's really what started the power ballad that kind of became a thing through the 80s. But anyway, my point was, he, in this article, was talking about watching this thing where Greg Rolie's kind of getting pushed to the side. And then by the time you get to Escape and then Frontiers and then Raised on Radio, you can see Steve Perry taking more and more control of the whole thing. And then the Perry, Jonathan Cain songwriting duo. Because what was the next song on Frontiers? Faithfully. Same thing again. It was kind of like Open Arms Part 2. And they ended up having a massive hit with that. Anyway, I'm getting way off here, but that's partly why I found this article so interesting and wanted to share it with you, because this guy, this reviewer, was kind of seeing it. He was saying, "I see a little rift starting here," and he was right. He was right. By the next studio album they put out, official one, I mean, you know what I mean. I've already explained that, which was Escape. Greg Rolie's gone, and he wasn't kicked out. Greg Rolie was not kicked out. Greg Rolie left, and you can watch interviews with him. I saw one once where he was saying, "Yeah, I mean, here we were, one of the biggest bands around, and it kind of seems crazy that I would want to leave that band." But really, he wanted to leave the band because he was this stuff right here. His influence was getting less and less. He was less and less important. Steve Perry was becoming, he was just overpowering everything. Once he joined the band, that was the secret sauce, was Steve Perry. Put him on the map, and Steve Perry knew it. Knew that he was the guy that did it. And so anyway, really, really interesting stuff. I hope you enjoyed that. Please follow the channel. If you know anybody, if you're a Journey fan, you probably know other people that are Journey fans. You might even be part of a Journey group on Facebook or something like that. Share this video with them. They'd probably love hearing this kind of thing because this is really cool Journey history. And of course, like the video, leave your comments. If you saw Journey on any of these tours, especially if you saw them with Greg Rolie, I would love to hear about it. We get the audience for this channel leaves some of the coolest stuff. Concert information about old concerts they went to. I mean, stuff before I was too young. I didn't go to any stuff. See them, especially in the Greg Rolie days. One of these days, we're gonna do some videos. It might be a month or two out, but we're gonna do some videos where we read some of these things that people have written about these concerts they went to, because we get such great feedback from the people that watch this channel. It is so cool. It is so fascinating. And if you haven't read some of the stuff that people write underneath some of these videos that we have on this channel, you need to take the time to do it. There's some such cool stuff. People that saw Led Zeppelin in concert, detailing all the things about what they saw and all the, I mean, it's really, really neat. So please leave your feedback. If you saw any of this stuff, document it. We'd love to have it, because we're gonna maybe start making some videos, reading through some of these things and talking about some of these reviews that people have. Anyway, thank you again for following our channel, watching these videos, and giving us your feedback. And with that, as always, have yourself a fantastic day.